Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Carl Wilkins. Q&A with our live audience and host, Anil Kanda. Today's episode, How Can I Be a Peacemaker? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
Have you heard that koi fish will travel in groups of 4 for safety? When in danger, the A, B, C koi will flee and escape, leaving behind the D koi. Most of us will flee in the face of danger. After all, self-preservation is usually our highest goal. But today we'll meet a man who determined there was a goal higher than that. In 1994, he was in Rwanda, serving as the head of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency International. As devastating events started unfolding, with neighbors and friends turning against one another in brutal violence, embassies quickly evacuated their citizens to avoid further casualties. Only one American chose to remain in Rwanda after the genocide began. Let's meet him right now. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Carl Wilkins. Carl, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Now, some of us who are older might know or might remember what took place in 1994, but there's a lot of younger viewers who might not know.
Sure.
Could you tell us what took place in Rwanda in 1994?
So it's a good question. It's a big question. You know, if you're just looking for the headline, a genocide where more than 1 million people were killed, largely by their neighbors. The weekend before we were camping, it was an Easter weekend. So we kind of adjusted, you normalize stuff. Wednesday night, the president's plane is shot down. Thursday, the killing is going on. And the embassy says, okay, we're staying. We already had plans to evacuate and where you would go, the ambassador's home, whatever you were close to. But by Friday, they're like, no, this is like nothing we've ever imagined before. We're evacuating. So on Saturday, the first convoys are leaving, and Sunday are the last ones. So the embassy is telling us, understandably, we're getting out of here. We're not flying. A bunch of European countries were flying, but like the president's plane was shot down, we're going to drive, but don't bring any Rwandans. And that was where the problem was for me and my wife. We had, three small children at that time, and there was a young lady who lived and worked in our home, and she was of the minority group that was being targeted at this. You know, a lot of people think one group hated another. They'll hear the term Hutu or Tutsi. They married each other all the time. This is politically driven, convincing really decent neighbors that your neighbor might be the enemy. And how do people believe it? You know, those are really hard things to wrap around.
It wasn't purely the categorization of these two groups, but rather that it was oftentimes like a political alliance?
Very much, very much. You know, you can find what you want to control and manipulate people. Maybe it's race, maybe it's religion, you know, maybe it's economic, you know, maybe it's regional, you know. But in this case, they picked the tribal one. But in daily life, these people spoke the same language, played soccer together, drank beer together. They really lived together. So this is a serious division of ordinary people and creating an enemy out of your neighbor.
How bad was this genocide? What are we talking about here?
It was the
100
worst.
people, 1,000 people?
No. It was the worst in the last century. In 100 days, more than 1 million people. You can't, I mean, the Holocaust was horrible, the Cambodian genocide, they're horrible. And I don't want to get into some sort of comparing horrible type thing. I know you're not either, but it's really beyond. How do you understand, like, one person being killed 1 million times? How do you actually understand that? 10, 15,000 people a day, we try to wrap our mind around it.
When this started to take place and there was an evacuation, you evacuated your family. Why did you decide to stay behind?
Okay, the embassy said, don't bring any Rwandans. We're driving out, we'll be at roadblocks. If we have Rwandans in the vehicle, we don't care what group they're in, you can't bring Rwandans. And we had this young lady who lived and worked in our home, and she was like family. And when somebody loves on your kids, that's like family.
That's family, that's blood.
Yeah, better than blood sometimes. and so when they said, you know, you can't bring Rwandans, Rwanda had always, this was like our 10th year in Africa. We'd been in Zimbabwe and Zambia, and we had this welcoming spirit, this respect of foreigners. So I started thinking, if we just abandon her, she's going to be killed. And the young man came in the evening as watchman, he'll get killed too. So it really didn't start with this idea, I'm going to stand up against genocide, or, because we didn't know at the beginning. We just knew 2 people in our house would be killed, and maybe I could leverage that respect that they gave to foreigners to help them. So when I said goodbye to my wife and kids, I said 2 weeks maximum, love. This thing can't last longer than 2 weeks, because the world will not let 10, 20,000 people killed every day and do nothing.
And it lasted 100 days.
100 days. And we had UN soldiers there. We thought that the UN, after the Holocaust, we're saying never again. That's kind of a slogan that goes around. Now we have 2,500 UN soldiers who could stop this. You can probably already begin to start to sense the emotion. It's interesting. I've told this story for years, and every once in a while I find myself just being snatched back, in the trauma of that moment, and I remind myself, okay, you're sitting here, you're talking, it's here today, and we try to remember instead of relive. But as we go back and we look at it, this thing was preventable. This thing could have been stopped when it happened. There were UN soldiers who did not want to abandon. It was so strategically organized by this group of, it's always politicians and business people. Someone has to help them get in power. So it's always this kind of mixture of that is then working towards goals, sometimes not so bad and sometimes really horrible. And this one, this genocide, it's gonna go on for 3 months.
Right.
I'm going to be stuck in my house for 3 weeks. There's a 24/7 curfew that's going on. And finally, the government realized we can't keep everybody as prisoners in their house for so long. And so they start saying, if you have a good reason to come out, come to the government headquarters, we'll give you a travel permit. And so that's what eventually I shifted. I had this young lady and young man in my house, a pastor and his wife who came and joined. There were 5 of us. And the pastor, brilliant gentleman, he said, Carl, if you're going to do anything during this horrible time outside, because one morning after breakfast, we had a little, Bible study and stuff. I said, we got to do more, Pastor. We've been stuck here and I'm glad we're all still alive. But he says, if you're going to do more, you got to build a relationship with the people in power. And the people in power are the ones doing genocide.
Tell us, what were you witnessing there? You said there was, these soldiers, these massacres. What are we talking about specifically what's happening here, as much as you're able to share?
Yeah. Rwanda is a land of 1,000 hills, right? So you've got the capital city, you've got valleys and hills, and our house is on a hill, and we look down through the valley and we can see the skyline of the city over there. We're watching conventional warfare happen. Our house happens to be, as the plane is shot down and they blame it on the minority, well, many of the minority had fled at the time of independence 30 years earlier. They finally weren't allowed home. They got military training. They come back. So we have these 2 sides, this kind of refugee soldier side, Rwandan Patriotic Front, the extremist soldier side. And the dividing line was a road about 3 blocks from our house. So mortars are whistling over our house like our African gray parrot learned to whistle like a mortar, And so that kind of conventional warfare is going on. But then, while my wife and kids were still there, we're hearing this pounding and bashing of metal doors. They're killing our neighbors. They drape her body over the fence. So it's like this warfare going overhead, but then right next door, people are screaming and being slaughtered. And so, we knew we had to get our children out of there, but how could we abandon these people? And I love it when I get to tell this story. My wife's here because her decision was, I think, even tougher than mine to support that idea. I'll take them to safety, but you stay. My dad, now as a grandpa, that's why I say, what were you thinking? Huh? He's seeing his son. I'm not, okay, I could be his favorite. I got 2 older brothers. They're really good. But he's seeing me and he's thinking, this is like the end. This is suicide. So it was crazy throughout those 100 days, but it's amazing how you learn to kind of normalize the stuff that should never be normalized. We were there building schools and operating clinics and stuff before. So I have these, we've been there for 4 years already. So I've got these really trusted friends, colleagues. They had the majority ID card. Many of my men who worked with me, their wife had the minority ID card. So right in the home, their family is targeted. Their wife is to be eliminated, So these men They're courageously trying to protect their families at home while they come out and work with me. And our work basically boiled down to try to bring food and water to groups of orphans who are trapped around the city. When I met the leader, that's what he told us. They're playing like this is just a war.
Right, but this conflict is so interesting you're describing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not just between two armies, it's between neighbors,
Yeah.
it's within families. It's cutting right down the very middle of families, how this conflict is affecting everyone. Now, you said that you were helping with these orphanages. The organization that you're a part of was leading out with these orphanages?
Well, you know, before we had a large organization building schools and operating clinics, not working with orphanages. Okay. The genocide is launched. Almost all the foreigners leave. There are about 9 other white foreigners there from Europe, so there's a small group still in the city. And that's when I met the colonel in charge of the city, who's in prison now for his role in genocide. But I met him, oh yeah, we're at war. I said, look, I'm here with ADRA. We don't have much. I don't even know who or what I have, but I'm here. What can I do? And he then points us towards the orphanage. Then I find out some of my men are still available. Gasikwa starts working with me, Dawson. And so we pulled together a bit of a team, and we start trying to get, well, the first thing's water. The biggest orphanage we went to, it had like 80 kids typically, but when parents and people are being killed, parents are looking for a place for their kids. So this orphanage quickly grew to more than 400. You come in the parking lot, there's little graves, and you're like, machete? No. Grenade bullet? No. Diarrhea. These kids just need water. The moisture leaves their body. So we started trying to bring water, trying to bring food, medicine. The Red Cross was trying to bring medicine, and their people were drug out of their vehicles and killed right on the road. You know, it didn't matter. They had this Red Cross vest on.
Your description of this, it's like you're taking this right back to us, and I'm hearing the sounds as I'm imagining this, and just the challenges, probably not even close to what was actually being experienced. What gave you hope in the midst of all this? Why keep going? Why not just say, you know what, I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
Let them take care of this themselves.
I always have come to just believe that courage is contagious. And I just had some most courageous Rwandan people that I was working with. Neighbor ladies, okay, so Wednesday night the plane shut down while my family is still there. Thursday, they killed the UN soldiers, and that evening, I don't know why, but a gang came to our house. And these neighbor ladies we'd been living with for 4 years, they came out and they stood in front of the gate and they said no to this gang. You can't go in there. Basically, they said their kids play with our kids. So the courage is all around, even though you don't see it. And often people are like, well, how about God, you know? And I can understand when people say, God gave me courage, you know, and stuff like that. And there's no question, God did. I mean, I grew up with stories of David and Goliath and Esther for such a time as this, or the Underground Railroad, or, you know, the Holocaust and people protecting during that. But I always want to know why. And, you know, as I've looked back on it, I think I believed before that real evidence of God is like a miracle that nobody can explain. So you can't explain this, gotta be God. Now I'm like, I know this is kind of silly to put a percent, but let me just say, maybe 90% of the time, God works through people. He worked through those neighbor ladies. He worked through my friend Gasikwa. He had 40 people in his home. He's trying to feed these people. Half of them are kids, and his wife is a Tutsi, so she's targeted and stuff. They come to kill the people there, and he greets the guy with empathy. I mean, he says, he knows him. I don't know his name. I'll call him Bernard. Bernard, it's hard to eat these days, huh? You want some chickens? I got a chicken project. So the guy who's come to kill him and the people in his house, he's greeting him with that. And so I'm like, that's God.
And you're absolutely right, because you're seeing God work through these people in their hearts, in their love for other people. You know, I heard somebody once said there are 5 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the believer. And sometimes people will never read the first 4 Gospels, but they will read the 5th one. Yeah. And it sounds like you really saw God through the acts and the love and the community. These people are willing to lay aside differences and say, look, we're in this together.
Small numbers, but you saw it. And it doesn't matter how small. It doesn't matter if it's 2 neighbor ladies who actually end up keeping our family from being killed. And 10,000 other people out there doing harm and evil, that doesn't negate the act of those two ladies. So many times we're kind of quantitative in trying to figure stuff out, and some of this stuff is like, well, hope isn't logical. Hope is like you have a little molecule, like, like atomic or something, and you just hang on to that tiny piece of hope, and boom, it makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I mean, hope sometimes is in the face of going against logic, what's coming your way, and said, you know what, I'm believing that we're going to get out of this. I'm believing there's a God who's watching out. I'm believing that together we're gonna see a better day.
Yeah, and together is huge too.
Right.
I was working with people who actually have been arrested now and charged with genocide, and you're like, how could you work with people like that? And when I'm in Christian environments, we just talk openly about the unerasable image of God. No matter what you have done, you still have this core. You are made in the unerasable. So when I'm in, like this week I was at high schools in Long Island, we talk about a love core. When God is kind of a turnoff, which I get for some people, that word means betrayal or abandonment, or don't talk to me about God. And people say God's loving, God's all powerful. Well, what about the genocide, And I'm like, well, let's start by talking about love. And God is my framework for love.
And that's why the Bible says God is love.
I know, we've said it so many times.
You can't talk about love without talking about God, but you can't talk about God without talking about love. Did I say that right? Did I say the exact same thing? But either way, this is why John makes that argument, right? Yeah. He says, if you say you believe in God, but you don't love, you don't know him.
Yeah.
It's inexorably bound. Could you tell us the moment when you knew the genocide was over?
I would get up each morning and I would go out and I'd look out the window of my bedroom, watching for a soldier to walk past, looking for the uniform of these refugee soldiers, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And even in the morning, it was July 4. July 3, we still didn't know. This has been going on all of April, all of May, all of June. We're now moving into July. Fortunately, I could talk to my wife on the radio every day. We had like a ham radio. It was an incredible gift. She was in Nairobi, Kenya. And eventually a friend helped her get a radio so I could talk to the kids. And our 7-year-old said to me one day, 7. She said, Dad, will you be out by my birthday? Which was towards the end of June. I'm like, absolutely, love. This cannot last that long, but it comes and it passes. So we're just hoping it'll end. And finally, on July 4th, these refugee rebel soldiers, Rwandan Patriotic Front, they succeeded in driving the extremists out of the capital city, out of power, and out of the country. And we had an orphanage 2 houses down. And these soldiers, as they were securing the neighborhood, they came to our house and I talked to them and I said, hey, there's an orphanage 2 houses down. I'd like to show you guys because I'm concerned they got like 30 kids in there. And so he goes with his soldiers, and it's a regular home that's been used for an orphanage. They open the door and the soldiers have their machine guns, and they open the door and there's little kids peeking up out of cribs. And soon the officer tells them, put your safety on, put your rifle down. It was just hard to believe it was over. It was actually hard to sleep in the quiet. Man, I'm a mess, but it's
that's okay.
It's
Carl.
not a bad mess. I used to be a mess with a knot in my stomach. In fact, I hated crying when I talked about this. But I'm like, if you can't shed a tear about genocide, what can you?
Right, and the fact that this affects you still many years later, it just shows us the gravity and the immensity of how painful and how tragic and how violent this whole thing was.
We've got to be able to see, I know this sounds sort of like Pollyannish or something, but we got to be able to see that there is a future, and the only way I can get to the future is looking for the good.
Right.
And so that strategy and professional counseling, as far as me, really recognizing PTSD and then recognizing, okay, we can. Like this morning, even though it's gotten a bit emotional, I don't have the knot in my stomach like I used to because I'm remembering.
Right.
I'm not reliving. And so, we could go 100 directions.
Carl, I know we have much more to talk about. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with us. We've been speaking with Carl Wilkins, the only American who chose to remain in Rwanda after the genocide began. We'll hear more of what he sees on the other side of the Rwandan genocide after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been speaking with Carl Wilkins about his time in Rwanda during the genocide. We're going to talk about what happened after that and what lessons we can learn for today. Carl, going back to this whole experience, the young people you were surrounded with, did your students, did they ever ask, where's God in the midst of all of this?
I go to Chapman University a lot every semester. In fact, for some years, they've been teaching out of our book and stuff at one of the professors. And in recent years, and I'm learning each time I'm in the classroom, how do you explain this and how do you do? And when that question came up, I said, hey, what about God and the genocide? I'm like, oh, that is such a good question. Because I think that's what's driven totally so many people away from God, is this idea, if God is all powerful and all loving, what in the world, is going on here? So I say, I want to talk about God, but let's let that three-letter word aside for a minute, and let's talk about love. When you looked at the story of the genocide, did you see any examples of love? Because I find when we're looking for God, we're kind of doing this. But when we're asking about love, we're doing this. We're looking in our hearts and the other hearts. And those conversations become a lot more productive. And as we begin to unpack those conversations, and I told them about the neighbor ladies, for example, or my friend Gasikwa, or at the orphanage, you do begin to see love coming, even in the darkest type of a place there. And so then we can come back eventually, and I'll tell them, look, my framework for love, I grew up in a Christian community, so my framework for love is God. But I want you to hear I'm using this word framework. I am not trying to tell you this is the truth and how you have to believe and stuff. It's what works for me.
Carl, you're saying something that's a really powerful reframing. A lot of people always ask in the midst of adversity and trouble, why is there so much evil when, you're telling us there's a good God, and what you're telling us is, look, why is there good when there is so much evil?
When we're looking at this and saying, where is God, or love and framework? Okay, so now what about real love? If love starts to manipulate or coerce, it's not really love. So if God is somehow manipulating, so we think of this idea of control as, I don't know, puppet string or something like that. What if control was more influence? Instead of saying God's in control, and I don't want to get in an argument with anybody over that, because I understand a lot of people get comfort and things like that, but other people who've seen something like a genocide, they don't get comfort from that idea that God's in control, because it sure wasn't in control here. So I say, what if, like true love, we have complete freedom to choose? And the most powerful influence I saw in the genocide, the most prevalent influence was fear. And then you would see anger. That was the most prevalent, but the most powerful, and the one that endures and is still, because we can break cycles of violence. It's this idea of love. And so I'm more of a kind of influence. If you want to use the word control, you can, but I'm like a power of an influence as opposed to a manipulation. Because we all know, you've been in a relationship, love, that's manipulation. No.
Right. You're talking about families, you're even talking about God right here. Can you in any way make sense of the fact that neighbors were killing each other, even church members killing each other, maybe families? How does that even happen?
Our brain loves to get patterns, make a framework, have a structure. We need to have that so we know how to live. And as I started to learn about neuroplasticity, now I learned about this, the ability of our brain to rewire itself. I learned about that in a positive direction. Okay, there's nothing in there. I often say, how could you have a kind, generous neighbor become a murderer? And this one we know can happen because we see the bodies. But then, can somebody actually be a good neighbor, a trusted, maybe even a better neighbor than they were before? Because this neighbor bought the message, my world would be better without you in it. This neighbor bought the message of genocide. So could they ever be trusted again? And when I learned about neuroplasticity and how we can rewire our brain, in simple things, I decided quite a few years ago, I just really want to be more grateful. I feel myself being judgmental and cynical. So I started saying, I'm going to start thanking everybody who has to do with anything with food. My wife, the grocery store, you know, I will not leave a restaurant without pushing the door up into the kitchen. That eggplant parmesan was amazing, you know, and stuff. And then I'm driving across the bridge into New York to speak at a school, and it's $15, and I'm, $15, what a ripoff, you know. And halfway across the bridge, a voice says, "Did you thank the toll taker?" And I'm like, well, of course not. He's part of the system that robbed me. It's like, no. This morning when you left your hotel, you pushed the door open at the little breakfast bar to thank the lady there. She's like, "Oh, you're welcome. Are you coming back tonight?" And I'm like, "No, just one night." "Well, you have a good day." And we had this dopamine exchange, you know. I could have had the same thing at the toll booth that I did with the lady at the... So I can rewire my brain. And as I start with something simple like, thank you for food, those positive gestures, thoughts, patterns, habit also can work in the negative. And I can rewire my brain in a direction that actually doesn't see the neighbor for the human that they are. All it sees is the caricatures, the negativity that's been projected. That's all I begin to see. And they had radio in Rwanda they used comedy, they used music, they used flat out hate speech against the minority people.
Now, this is really fascinating because you're describing this massive propaganda that changed an entire, area of people and turned them against each other with this massive propaganda. How did Rwanda finally heal?
It's definitely an ongoing journey, but a most inspiring one. I probably would not be going to schools. Tomorrow I'm at a school in Baltimore. I probably would not be doing this if I was only talking about the genocide. Let's look at it. Let's look at first individual story and then a little bigger picture, okay? Maria and her husband. Maria's the same age as me. She's a year younger. She's born in 58. She and her husband made the decision to split up for the kids' sake. They thought, they had 3 kids. If we can be in a group of 2, me and our daughter, 3, him and the 2 boys, there's a better chance to hide, to be hid by neighbors, and stuff like that. My wife and I chose to split we weren't targeted, so it's a totally different, and the story begins to go very different directions. Her husband and sons will tragically be killed. She will survive. The guy who was one of the guys who was a neighbor, who was in the gang, will get released from prison after he does a time. When he gets out, though, she understandably, she didn't want to be anywhere near this guy. And I understand it. They had some community projects. They're building homes with one another, working with adobe bricks and stuff. But she tried everything to avoid him. But what she wanted more than to avoid him was to know where her husband and sons were buried. And he knew. She says this was a turning point. You see, when she introduced us 25 years later, she didn't introduce us to the killer of her husband and sons. She introduced us to an incredibly valued family friend. And then we found out that he was, at the time, 25 years ago, he was 18 and he was in the gang who killed, and I was messed up. I didn't care what she said about him. Helping me plant and harvest, I'm like, that's the least he can do. She says he does things for me like my sons would have done if they're alive. And I'm like, okay, I'm not saying this out loud, right? It's in my head, huh? I'm like, well, if he wouldn't have killed them, they would be here to do it. You see, I'm stuck in 94. I'm stuck in anger and stuff like that. And Maria is like free. And so here's how it sort of makes sense to me, at least this is a framework I'm working with now, is that initially when he got out of prison, Maria had all these neural pathways of perhaps confusion, anger, bitterness, loneliness type of thing. But she says it was a turning point when he helped me find where my husband and sons were buried. Some truth. She found out when he was in prison, considering confessing, other prisoners were threatening to kill him if he confessed. And he still confessed and he apologized to her. Some respect. He kept coming to her again and again and apologizing. When I heard it, I'm like, okay, one is good, now get out, She's like, I'm sure she was like, Filbert, you don't have to keep apologizing to me every day. Empathy. So she's like developing a whole new network of pathways that are triggered when she sees him. She will always have the pathway, he killed my husband and sons. But that pathway, which before was surrounded by pathways of anger and fear and confusion and loneliness, now potentially, this is my theory, okay? And it's sort of, I know enough about neuroscience to be dangerous, but she's now got that pathway surrounded by other pathways of his courage, respect, empathy, and it's like, he is not the same man in her eyes as the one who killed. So instead of that pathway being, yeah, he's in the gang that killed, it's like, I know he's in the gang that killed, but you should know him today.
Carl, but that's tough to hear from.
Oh, it took me, like I said, I was like, no, Maria, he didn't help you heal. You are strong. You are courageous. You did that yourself. And when I went back home and I'm journaling, I'm like, what is wrong with you, Carl? Every time she said something positive, you're saying something negative against that. And I realized I had a subconscious belief. My brain is always trying to gather, organize information, retrieve it quick to keep me alive and even happy.
I know, I'm experiencing it as we're talking.
and so, yeah, I hope some rewiring. And so I'm like, Carl, what is your problem? Every time she says something positive, you think negative. And I realize I have a subconscious belief that says if you say something positive about somebody who's done something horrible, you are diminishing the crime and their accountability. And when I write that out in my journal, I'm like, that's messed up. I mean, I see sort of logic, but it's like, that's surely not healing. That is not restorative. That is not really true. When Maria says something positive about him, you think she's diminishing the crime? I'm like, no. His accountability? No. So this whole thing of, it's kind of, there's introspection, there is, do you believe people can change? And Maria, like in Rwanda, you've got just like a long mass of people in a line. I try to imagine it that way. And some are like Maria in the front saying, hey, it's possible, come on out. And others are in the back saying, what is that, Stockholm Syndrome? Or, what kind of messed up thing is that? One of Survivor, he actually said to me, we call that trauma. When we see a survivor build a relationship with a perpetrator, we call it trauma. And at the end he says, but we all want it. We want to get free from anger and bitterness because those are the things that perpetrate violence, is anger and bitterness.
Right, and I think you're really communicating, hey, look, the people of Rwanda understood that if we keep this bitterness and this anger and this frustration, this cycle will repeat itself.
Yes.
Let me ask you, what kinds of messages were being communicated to the people of Rwanda that started to help them reconcile and, as you're describing, forgive?
Yeah.
In other places, repent, reform, change. What kinds of messages were being, you just don't wake up one day, the next day after and just be like, well, they killed my neighbor, I'm going to be okay. There seems to be messages that were being communicated that at least corporately started to lead the country into a place of healing. What kind of messages were they?
There's a drawing I have, one of the images, about punitive justice and restorative justice. Okay, so we're all pretty familiar with these pyramids, and we all are like, okay, who did it? And we'll punish you. We find out who's to blame, we'll punish you, and we get justice. But rarely does that break the cycle of violence. Or even more important, rarely does it heal. So Rwanda had a thing in their culture, in their past, called gacaca. Basically, when you had a problem, but you got these respected male elders who come in and help you resolve the problem. So they had to first establish safety. You need a foundation of safety so we can start to, instead of blame, try to understand the harm. First the harm to the victim, but then the people who did harm have had harm. Harm breeds more harm and more violence. So we've got to look at and the future of harm. I often wonder, look, just lock them up and throw the key away. That's much easier, but it's not going to break the cycle of violence. I'm like, well, I don't care. Oh, wait a minute. I look at my kids. I look at my grandkids. Yes, I do care. So I might let go of my right to punitive to try this pretty wild and risky and no guarantee restorative model that says we're going to unpack the harm.
Restorative justice.
Then we're going to try to unpack that. It's got to be safe, because if we talk about rape and murder and we don't have a safe societal kind of community to support in that, we'll make it worse. In fact, when the experts of the world heard what Rwanda is going to do, they ended up setting up 12,000 community courts. Rwanda's like the size of Rhode Island. So this country is plastered with community courts for 10 years. They're going to have more than 1.9 million cases tried. And that's not people, that's cases, because the guy could have killed multiple people, he could have destroyed homes, he could have raped, all these things. And so they're going to have these community courts, a guy with a pink uniform who's standing in the middle of a soccer field, and there's a table there with judges, and these judges have been chosen by the community. And he's come out to confess, like Filbert, say, for example. And then the community, there's no defense and no prosecution. That's the community. The community is the defense, the community is the prosecutors. And he will confess. This is an opportunity for people like Maria to learn where their family's buried. to learn the truth and to start talking together. It's a chance for accountability. A big problem with restorative often is we have no accountability. No, there's accountability with restorative, but it's more of an accountability almost of the heart of unpacking the harm and then how do we repair this? So Rwanda said, look, we've had homes destroyed in the genocide here. If you come and confess and the judges, the community members decide you're safe to work in the community, they'll send you to work in a camp. There's no fence, the guard doesn't have a gun, this is collaborative. And they're building homes, they're building roads, they're doing terraces. But my mind automatically goes to, okay, that's good, but doesn't that seem like people who did genocide are now doing community service? Doesn't that seem like a joke, like a slap on the wrist? And I'm like, if we're trying to think payback, yes, because you can't pay back. In fact, I love pulling up those two pyramids again. And this time when we look at those pyramids, we recognize that the first one, punitive, is very transactional. It is not fair. So what we're advocating in breaking the cycle of violence and going to healing is not fair, which was a problem for me. Because I'm like, I can't advocate something that's not fair. Well, if it's not working, if people are not healing, we've got, and then, oh, dude, snap, it's love is not fair. Oh, that's what really makes love is when it's not fair. When you do it because you deserve it, well, that's nice. But that's not love. The deepest love is not fair. And so, as I was saying to this student who pointed out, that's not fair. I'm like, I so hear you. But now, if you actually look at this transformative model, you believe people can change, it can break the cycle of violence, it can lead to healing. I'm asking myself, when am I missing transformative experiences because of this transactional, vice lock in my head? I'm so transactional when I think.
I mean, we all are, not just individuals, but as you're just talking about this, I'm just thinking about, political parties. I'm thinking about the heads of governments. I'm thinking about our entire world doesn't see this restorative justice oftentimes.
No.
We want payback. We want revenge, and we think they'll accomplish harmony. And at the end, all it does is perpetuate the cycle. I mean, think about it. The last 100 years has just been this stronger exposure. There's always been cycles throughout human history, but the last 100 years, it's been recorded and documented like never before. And this generation that's living today is able to look back on human history like never before and judge human history.
So yesterday, I'm with these kids on Long Island. And the student comes up to me after we're talking about this and all these things, and he says to me, I came in here kind of like a zombie. And I looked at these stories and stuff. I want you to know, this is making a difference to me. You talk about this generation, they're looking for some sort of a structure and then examples. If you look, I get this picture of Maria and Filbert where he's looking at her, and as he looks into her face, it's like, she gave me my life back. During a time like this, we talk about rescuers and stuff, but after the genocide is still this great need for rescuing. And he really is changed. And so I could go on and on, but I'll stop with this. Those two pyramids, transactional, transformative. Then I start thinking about God and how we think about God. And do we think about God in a transactional way or we say, no, it's transformative. But then we lay out all these transactional things you have to do to get transformed. And so
I want to point out something in your communication I think is a really interesting pattern, but I think it's an important lesson, and that is this. When I've asked you questions about particular parts of what took place, I notice, and I don't know if you're just neurodivergent, but I notice that you will pair it with something hopeful and something that was a resolution or something that good came out of this. And I really appreciate this perspective because that is probably the most healthiest thing to do as responsible as we are to share history is to share all of it, not one side of it.
It almost seems obscene to mention anything positive. And I get that. I really do. So I want to be super sensitive, especially when I'm around survivors and stuff. But they are the ones, like Maria, who are also teaching me that there comes a time and a place. In her case, it may be many years. as it does like others. But that is possible. I'm also trying to not, sometimes I like to kind of get a nice bow on it at the end, kind of thing. And I think I've grown up too with this sense of, I want to know certainty. I want to know, okay, so that's how it is. And learning to live without certainty is a real challenge for me right now. But I'm very curious about it, and I'm very excited about it. There is some things that I'm certain. And for me, I am certain about love. And for me as an individual person, I am certain about God. I mean, I love the idea of Trinity, because how does one person love? So I love them all loving on each other, And I really love the idea that we all have a love core inside of us. But then you start to unpack that and look with different, well, how is that working? And there's a lot of uncertainty. Good. Celebrate it. Explore and find out, where will that uncertainty? I think that's faith. Faith isn't certainty. Faith is being able to live with uncertainty, but with the foundation of love.
What an incredibly moving and profound story. You've heard my question, yet I'm certain there's much more our viewers are eager to uncover. Stay with us, because when we return, it's time for our audience to ask their questions. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope at Night. Tonight, we've been learning what Carl Wilkins went through and what he learned from his experience in the midst of the Rwandan genocide. Now we're going to give our studio audience the chance to ask their questions. Who would like to go first?
Would God still love me if I can't find it in my heart to forgive the person who took the lives of my loved ones?
Oh, man. Thank you. That's a really good question. For me, there's absolutely zero question. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think forgiveness sometimes can take generations, okay? I also think that forgiveness, we need to unpack really what is forgiveness. Sometimes we think forgiveness is reconciliation, like the story I told. Sometimes it's not safe to reconcile. And so I love the definition of just simply, how can I get free from anger and bitterness? Those two things. And of course, like your kid or anybody else that you have, a friend, family member, they're really struggling. I struggle with that anger and bitterness. And so it's the love. If love is contingent on that, it's not love. It's some sort of manipulation or something like that. So I would love to talk about it more, but absolutely, there's no question. For me, love's got no limits. I mean, we know genocide has no limits, which often can throw us in a tailspin, but I also want to counter, love's got no limits.
Right, and that's beautiful, Carl. And I think a question that kind of emerges from that is, sometimes we feel like, I could never forgive someone because how could I? How?
Yeah.
Where would it even come from?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And it's oftentimes, I have found in my personal experience, by looking at the cross, I find forgiveness that comes from heaven for me that streams out to others when it's not easy to do. Doesn't come from me naturally, so.
No. Yeah.
Any other questions?
We all know it takes time to forgive. When we forgive the other person, even though we forgave them, do God punish the other person even though we forgave them?
I really like that one too, because forgiveness is not taking away the punishment, and it's not taking away the consequences. From my perspective, what I understand about forgiveness. Forgiveness is, like I said, letting go of anger and bitterness. Now, figuring out how to do that, that's tough. And that's where I really appreciate people like Maria, who's out there kind of saying, hey, it is possible to get free. When you look at this lady, people sometimes say, oh, the government was forcing people to forgive. And you'll hear all kinds of stories in Rwanda. And I know I've been really positive about my telling of Rwanda here. And I'm sure I'm more biased than the more positive side. There are stories that are just not like that. We're humans, and it is in very, very different ways. But I think it's really valuable in the conversation to say there are consequences. A lot of times our action has with it consequences natural. I mean, Filbert didn't want to be around Maria when he came out. I mean, and the shame and everything that must have been with him. So I'm more than happy, like I imagine most people are, I'll leave that with you, God, but consequences do not go away because of forgiveness. And I think that helps because there's a sense of justice that is right. I don't want to throw out all transactional justice. We need it. But my problem or experience is that it doesn't usually go far enough. And so we've got to be able to go farther than just justice to get to the healing. And that's where the question of anger and bitterness, comes in. And so I like that question. Thanks.
That's why a lot of times in our attempts with transactional justice, the problems reemerge somewhere else.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't
No, it gets
hit you
shoved
hard.
down, comes out somewhere else, or yeah.
Any other questions?
If the principle of eye for an eye is looked down upon, then why did God allow it to be a part of the Old Testament?
Oh my goodness. And there's genocide in the Old Testament too, so your question is great. And at times I'm like, I don't need the Old Testament, thank you. I'll just go with the New Testament, type things. But then there's lessons in there. The short version that I can think of for that is meeting people where they are. And it would be to come back to this idea that I don't think restorative throws out everything transactional or punitive. We all kind of see, and we probably heard the expression, okay, if we go for an eye, we're going to be a bunch of blind people, running around. So we recognize that, probably the larger. One guy actually says, a literal translation of so many things often blinds us. We need to go deeper. What's really deeper in that one? And the sense that, what we do, somebody says, I'm sorry, and then they're like doing it again, and they're often, it means nothing and those types of things. So I think there's something in that conversation, both meeting them where they are, but also understanding, well, what really is a consequence and what is, and were they being facetious at that time? I'm not a theologian, so I'm not really sure about that, but I do know, man, my life experience says, just because I poked the guy's eye out doesn't make me feel better in the end. I mean, there's a certain sense of maybe satisfaction, but it doesn't last. Doesn't last for me.
Right, and it seems like a prevention also of groups escalating, where, you hurt me, I'm going to wipe out your whole family.
Yeah, it does.
And there is this just escalation
Snowball.
that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like revenge. When someone's in the mindset of revenge, there's no boundaries there.
No.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just curious what the social and political climate was 1 year in advance to up to 1 month before the genocide, and if people saw it coming. Was anybody predicting that was what was going to happen?
I like both the 1 year and the 1 month part of your question. The 1 month part is a lot easier. We saw, but we didn't see genocide coming. I actually sent, back in the day, fax. I sent a fax to the church headquarters saying, we're sitting on a keg of dynamite here. There were massacres, and I hate to even say, but I sometimes say small massacres. I mean, no massacre would be small, but 20 people compared to 10,000 people. There were massacres happening on a smaller scale. That's probably what I should say. Happening around, so we knew that there was problems going on. There were demonstrations. There was this tension, and I remember in the fax I said, look, it could explode tomorrow, but we're hoping there's a new broad-based government that has been agreed on by everybody and should be launched, and we hope it'll diffuse all of this tension. But that didn't happen. I was just trying to reassure them we had evacuation plans in place, and it's not caught us, totally unaware. The year ahead, I would even stretch to 3 years ahead. We had war, and I think in this short amount of time we have, it's just worth exploring or stating that these kind of horrible atrocities almost always happen within the framework of a war, within the environment of war, where we have somehow suspended our sense of horror at killing, at death, and even, I don't know that you could say fully suspended, but that innocent people are going to suffer. We have these terrible phrases right now. Now this gives me a knot in my stomach, collateral damage, and I'm just sick when I hear that sound. But I think that environment of war is really a huge part of this. And so I'm going to just make a little plug. about, I know I said earlier, and I never finish a lot of thoughts about male elders, you know, in the Gacaca course in the community, and the role of women. Rwanda has said we need, as we're rebuilding and going in a restorative direction, we need to empower women. So it's in their constitution that 1/3 of every decision-making group is women. 1/3 of their parliament isn't women. It's actually 2/3. By law, 1/3 must be. But once you give some space and start to allow growth and development, 2/3 of their parliament is women now. So I have often wondered, how quick would we go to war if we had more women in government?
Carl, you know, this question has to do with climate, the political climate, the social climate. You know, we live in a highly charged climate right now in the United States. For a number of years, it's just intensified. And there are so many people that are at odds. There are lines drawn in the sand between, you know, entire cities, communities, within families, you know, with this recent election. How are we able to find unity and hope again in the midst of just this electrified environment?
Well, you know, like I do, there is no simple answer to that. So all I can do is give you a few pieces for the conversation that come to my mind as I think about that. I was really aha moment maybe 6 years ago when I realized that the brain prioritizes community over logic. So the brain's job is to keep us alive. And so for me to stay alive, I need to be in a community, and to flourish, I need to be in a community. And we can study, you know, anthropology and all these things, and we can see the role of a community and stuff. And so I'm often trying in these situations to understand or get the other person to understand. And if they feel like their community is being attacked, the more they feel that, the more the logical part of the brain is offline. So I'm like, wait a minute, this is so logical. Why are they, you know, they're not stupid, this type of thing. And so when I realized the brain prioritizes community over logic, I'm like, okay, so quit trying to give them all this logic and stuff. How about a little bit of listening? A little bit of listening and try to understand. I love Eleanor Roosevelt. She would say, if you're arguing a case with somebody and you can't argue their side as effectively as they can, you've got a lot more listening you need to do. So I think understanding the brain helps me in some of that, but really listening, and I'll come back to the family that we talked about earlier. If I can first off get to know somebody for something else other than their political views or their, you know, their religious views at times and stuff, I've got a lot better chance then of keeping perspective and not losing that kind of perspective in terms of just simply, oh, I know what kind of sign is in their yard, so I know who they are and I know all about them. And that idea is, I think the brain is sort of to blame for that too, because it likes to simplify. So I need to push back on the brain and say, no, you do not need simple singular solutions. This is a little more nuanced. Let's go from simplicity to complexity and even perplexity. And that's how we reach harmony. And that didn't originate with me. That's Brian McLaren, but I love that model.
You know, it's really interesting. News agencies, without blasting particular ones, many of them have really contributed to the simplistic thinking. You're on this side of the aisle or you're on this side of the aisle. And this campaign-style reporting has really, not as being the you know, total blame for it, but it's contributed to a lot of the agitation. What's going on there, you think?
I think, you know, in Rwanda they had 3 years of war before this genocide. 3 years of people running to their, I call it the downstairs brain, okay, the amygdala. That's Dan Siegel at UCLA. He's a great guy. I learned a lot from him on YouTube, still learning. But, you know, that's where the fight-flight kind of mentality is. And when you are used to doing that, like in a war, you're like running like to the cellar for a tornado or something, your brain develops those patterns and you can see enemies where there are not enemies. And we need something at times to stop us and say, whoa, wait a minute, I don't need to be in my downstairs brain. So I, for example, you know the shorts that you scroll through online? What do you think gets the most, I mean, aside from cats, what do you think gets the most hits on these things? And it's usually something that makes me angry or is just unbelievable, is shocking. And that's where I think the internet makes its money on downstairs brain stuff instead of upstairs prefrontal cortex. empathy, creativity, logic, that wonderful place up there. So I quit, I don't remember how long ago, saying I'm just not scrolling anymore. I mean, you know, my kids will send me something and I'll watch it, and that's great. I'm not scrolling anymore. There's a good dopamine from when we have great positive interchanges, but I think there's also an unhealthy addictive dopamine. So I'm not like trying to blame everything on the internet, but I'm responsible for what I consume and what I do with my time, and recognizing what it does to the brain. I was an old shop teacher, auto mechanics and stuff, so I like to know the mechanics. Recognizing what it does to my brain, that helps me. Having grandkids really helps me too, because they're bringing out, I'm trying to be my best person.
Carl, thank you for being very real to us. Oh, well, thank you. And also sharing hope in the midst of all that you've experienced. And it's been a blessing. It's been very enlightening and inspirational to us.
Thank you. You've been easy to talk to. Appreciate it.
It doesn't make sense logically why anyone would want to leave safety and go into danger to save someone else. But that's exactly what Jesus did for us. He left the comfort of heaven, being surrounded by angels, and traded it for a manger in a barn. A life of trials and criticisms, and finally death on a cross by the very ones he came to save. That just boggles my mind. And he did it all so that one day he could bring us into an eternity of love and peace in heaven with him. I want to serve a God like that. And while we're here on this earth, let's do what we can to reflect that same unselfish love and deep peace into this world. Because doing his will brings us hope for the future, hope for today, and hope for tonight.